In late August 2024, in a stunt straight out of a thriller, a gang of criminals disguised as police officers stole an immense 1,400 kilos of coke. Apart from its dramatics, the heist was quite the opposite of being ordinary. The coke belonged to a network of criminal elites, including Dutch crime lord Ridouan Taghi. The heist involved notorious Belgian gangster Hakim M, better known as Crazy Hakim. The heist was meticulously planned, almost materialistic in execution. A truck loaded with sports bags of coke was making its way from the port of Antwerp, one of Europe's major narcotic trafficking hubs, to a secret location. As it crossed the Belgium-Netherlands border, a car with flashing police lights forced the truck to a halt. The Bosnian driver, believing he was being pulled over by legitimate officers, complied. But what happened next left him and his criminal employers reeling. Disguised as cops, they swarmed the truck, overpowered the driver, and vanished with the multi-million-euro cargo. Within hours, the heist sent shockwaves through Europe's criminal underworld, sparking violence across Belgium, the Netherlands, and Dubai. This was more than a botched narcotics deal. It was a ruthless assault on Ridouan Taghi's criminal empire, the kingpin who controls his criminal network with ruthless efficiency from the Netherlands' most secure prison. It was the audacity of Crazy Hakim, a man who survived assassination attempts, prison, and a litany of feuds to become one of the region's most feared underworld figures. The aftermath of the theft was brutal. Kidnappings, arson, bombings, and targeted shootings transformed quiet neighbourhoods into war zones. Within days, revenge attacks were reported in Rotterdam, The Hague, and Antwerp, targeting anyone suspected of involvement in the heist. Graffiti scrawled across the walls of houses read "Death to Thieves," and insiders revealed that the hunt for the thieves was not just a matter of recovering lost millions, it was a matter of honour. The heist triggered a criminal war that quickly involved law enforcement across Europe, scrambling to contain chaos before it spills into the public realm. The question now isn't just who pulled off the heist, but how far these criminal titans are willing to go to reclaim what was taken from them. And, as the violence escalates, it's clear that no one in the criminal network is safe from the fallout. On August the 29th, 2024, just outside of Antwerp, Belgium, an unassuming Eastern European truck driver picked up a container loaded with cargo from Key 913, one of the most secure docking areas at the port of Antwerp. Inside the container sat 1,400 kilos of pure coke, destined for a top-secret warehouse in West Brabant, a location carefully chosen by Ridouan Taghi's network. But the journey would take an unexpected and dangerous turn before the truck reached its destination. Just as the truck reached a quiet stretch of road near Kemziki, a small Belgian town near the Dutch border, the driver noticed flashing blue lights in his rearview mirror. Assuming it was a routine police stop, he slowed down and pulled over. What he didn't realise was that this was no ordinary traffic stop, and these were no ordinary cops. The men who approached his truck were wearing uniforms, but they were criminals through and through. This wasn't their first heist, and they had the perfect setup: police disguises, sirens, and detailed information about the shipment's route. Without much resistance, the driver was quickly overpowered as the officers held him at gunpoint and took control of the truck. In a matter of minutes, the team had seized the sports bag containing the coke and vanished, leaving the driver stranded and terrified. By the time the authorities were alerted, the thieves were long gone, their route meticulously planned to avoid detection. The thieves knew exactly what they were after and who would come looking for them. This wasn't a random job. As word of the heist spread, the impact on the underworld was immediate. The criminals who had invested in the shipment were livid, seeing this not only as a financial loss, but as a direct challenge to their authority. It was especially true for Ridouan Taghi, who had spent years building his empire into one of Europe's most powerful criminal organisations. From within the walls of Werk prison's highest security wing, Taghi reportedly sent out orders and kept the network running as seamlessly as possible. But this heist represented a significant crack in his control, an insult he couldn't ignore. The heist evidently involved Belgian criminal Zotti Hakim, or Hakim M, whose reputation was no less notorious. Known for his violent past and connections to some of Europe's most dangerous criminals, Hakim was a man feared even within criminal circles. Only days after the heist, he had been arrested after a house search when the authorities found police uniforms at his house, indicating he was likely connected to the very gang that had pulled off the robbery. And soon after his arrest, Hakim's house in Antwerp was targeted. In the days following the robbery, speculation about who tipped off the fake cops ran rampant. According to insiders, the Bosnian transporter was tortured when he arrived cokeless at the destination. He admitted to playing the double game. He had gambled with his life, and now he was paying the price. But the transporter wasn't the only one who paid the price of this heist. The incident triggered a series of violence incidents. Belgian and Dutch law enforcement agencies scrambled to get a handle on the unfolding chaos. Antwerp's port security, one of the most advanced in Europe, was under scrutiny, and intelligence agencies across the continent were on high alert, trying to piece together how such a daring heist could have slipped under their radar. To understand the gravity of this heist and the violent aftermath, you have to understand the people behind it, the criminal masterminds who don't just operate outside the law, but have built entire empires based on violence, intimidation, and a relentless drive for control. Ridouan Taghi is no stranger to headlines, nor is he a stranger to prison. Arrested in Dubai in 2019 and extradited to the Netherlands, Taghi was Netherlands' most wanted man, heading what prosecutors described as a well-oiled killing machine. He was sentenced to life after getting extradited.
Ridouan Taghi, one of the Netherlands' most wanted criminals, has been sentenced to life in prison. The case against the drug cartel leader and 16 other members of his crime gang related to several murders, including a journalist who'd been supporting the prosecution's key witness. Prosecutors described Taghi's organisation as a well-oiled killing machine.
His arrest was a high-profile victory for European law enforcement, but even in confinement, Taghi's influence is as powerful as ever. Known as the undisputed leader of the Morocco Mafia, a Dutch-Moroccan criminal organisation, Taghi's network is involved in everything from large-scale coke trafficking to assassination plots. In February 2024, he received a life sentence in the infamous Marengo murder trial, which detailed his role in 6 assassinations, 4 attempted eliminations, and numerous conspiracies to eliminate rivals. And then there's Abdel Hakim M, or Crazy Hakim, a man whose life reads like the script of a crime drama. Hakim, a Belgian national with Moroccan roots, is infamous in the European narcotic trade and is well known in the Antwerp underworld. His criminal history spans decades, from trafficking to violent assaults. He's faced numerous arrests, survived assassination attempts, and has had a criminal reputation that makes even hardened gangsters think twice. Known for his unhinged persona, Hakim earned the name Crazy Hakim for his unpredictable and often brutal approach to resolving conflicts. In 2013, he narrowly escaped an attempt on his life. In 2016, Zoti Hakim survived another attempt on his life that had to do with a conflict in the underworld. Hakim's ties to the stolen coke came into question when the authorities found police uniforms at his home shortly after the heist. Though the investigation is still ongoing, many in the underworld suspect Hakim had a hand in organising the robbery. Interestingly, Hakim wasn't held for long after this arrest. He was released soon after the house raid and despite having possession of police uniforms. Beyond these two, other major players include Serbian, Albanian and Brazilian criminal groups who have long-standing alliances with both Taghi and Hakim. Another significant group implicated in this heist includes Serbian gang members, notorious for their brutal enforcement tactics and strong ties to South American narcotic suppliers. In the world of European organised crime, Serbian networks are highly respected for their efficiency and ruthlessness. With such high-stakes players involved, it's clear why the response to the theft has been swift and violent. As the investigation continues, authorities believe that the rippers, i.e. thieves, are primarily Dutch nationals, many of whom operate out of major cities like Rotterdam, The Hague and Amsterdam. These thieves may have underestimated the backlash they'd faced for crossing some of Europe's most feared criminal figures. The rippers' identities remain unknown, but rumours suggest that at least some of them have sought refuge in Dubai, where they hope to avoid the brutal retaliation unfolding back home. Hakim's home on the Borghout district was bombed, the front of the building destroyed in an explosion that rattled the neighbourhood. The violence then escalated across the border into the Netherlands. In Rotterdam, a city already notorious for gang-related conflicts, multiple explosions rocked residential areas. An attack on a building in Allard-Pearsonstraat set off a fire so intense that 14 flats were deemed uninhabitable. Families were evacuated, and although no one was injured, the attack sparked widespread fear. Rumours spread that the explosion was linked to a retaliation effort connected to the stolen coke. In The Hague, the violence took on a chilling new dimension. In Chicago Strat, a device exploded outside a family home where children were sleeping, causing extensive damage to the front of the house. Remarkably, the family claimed to have no ties with any criminal activity, yet their home had become a target in a brutal underworld feud. Just a week and a half earlier, an arson attack had occurred 2 doors down, with the security forces investigating whether it was another mistake in a string of revenge attacks. but insiders believed that these attacks were no accidents. Each was a calculated strike meant to send a message to those responsible for the heist. By mid-September, the violence reached Alphen an den Rhin, a quiet town unaccustomed to gang warfare. In a shocking display, a masked man armed with an automatic weapon fired a volley of bullets into homes in broad daylight. The authorities soon arrested 2 suspects in nearby Almere and 2 more in Alphen, who were found carrying explosives. Yet, despite these arrests, the violence only continued to spread, with multiple neighbourhoods in the Netherlands gripped by fear. The violence wasn't confined to Europe. In Dubai, a Dutch man in his 30s was kidnapped, bound and severely beaten. Photographs of his bloodied face circulated in certain circles, serving as a warning to anyone believed to be involved in the heist. The man's release, reportedly due to the intervention of security forces, might have saved his life, but it didn't stop the cycle of violence. The attacks in Dubai underscored the global reach of these criminal networks and the lengths they would go to protect their reputations and recover their losses. The National Crime Investigation Department in the Netherlands was quick to pick up on the links between these violence incidents and the heist. They warned police officers across the country, advising them to connect any similar attacks to the robbery and to prevent further incidents from being ignored or misclassified. However, tracking the violence and pinpointing its origins proved challenging, as multiple gangs had taken matters into their own hands. Law enforcement faced a monumental task, unravelling a web of alliances, betrayals and revenge plots that spanned cities and crossed international borders. For the residents of cities like Rotterdam, The Hague and Antwerp, the violence was not just a distance concern, but a threat on their doorsteps. Public anxiety grew as the explosions became more frequent, and the unpredictable nature of the attacks left people fearing for their safety. Buildings that had once seemed ordinary were now the sites of brutal gang reprisals, and families with no connections to the criminal world were caught in the crossfire. Police sources reported an increase in calls from citizens worried about the rise in gang-related violence, and the pressure on law enforcement to solve the case mounted. The scale and audacity of the heist, coupled with the violent backlash that followed, forced law enforcement agencies across Europe into a coordinated response. The Dutch and Belgian police, joined by their counterparts in Dubai, found themselves grappling with sprawling criminal investigation that required not only tracking down the stolen coke, but also containing the growing wave of violence spreading across cities. The stakes were higher than ever. This was no longer a matter of routine enforcement, but a battle to prevent the streets of Rotterdam, The Hague, Antwerp and beyond from becoming war zones. Belgium's police, especially in Antwerp, also ramped up their operations. Antwerp, as one of Europe's busiest narcotic trafficking hubs, was already under close surveillance due to its strategic importance to criminal networks. Yet, the level of coordination required for a heist of this scale suggested that someone with intimate knowledge of the port's security had tipped off the Rippers. Belgian authorities launched an internal investigation to determine how the heist could have occurred right under their noses. Despite advanced surveillance technology, customs checkpoints and regular port inspections, the criminals had managed to evade detection. This lapse sparked public criticism, prompting Belgian officials to increase security measures at ports and ramp up intelligence gathering efforts. The investigation faced additional roadblocks when it came to deciphering the Underworld's web of alliances and rivalries. The criminals behind the heist and the ensuing violence were part of tightly knit networks, each group with its own layers of security and loyalty. Taghi's network, for example, used multiple trusted operatives who handle everything from illicit shipments to assassination plots. These operatives are adept at covering their tracks, using encrypted communication and employing a rotating roster of cleaners, criminals tasked with erasing any traceable evidence. This level of organisation has long been a source of frustration for law enforcement, who often struggle to gather actionable intelligence against Taghi's associates. In the Netherlands, the police faced similar challenges. In Rotterdam, where multiple attacks had taken place, officers conducted raids on suspected gang hideouts, arresting individuals believed to be involved in the arson and explosions. Despite these arrests, the violence continued unabated, with gangs targeting one another in increasingly public and dangerous ways. Surveillance teams were deployed to monitor known gang affiliates, but the police were cautious in their approach, aware that provoking further violence could lead to even deadlier reprisals. Meanwhile, the Dutch and Belgian police were also receiving public pressure to address the safety concerns of local residents. Explosions in residential areas, particularly those involving families with no criminal ties, has sparked widespread anxiety, with citizens fearing they could be caught in the crossfire. Despite the difficulties, the police continue to close in on key suspects. Over several weeks, Belgian authorities conducted multiple raids across Antwerp, arresting figures connected to Taghi's network and seizing large caches of weapons and money. In the Netherlands, police apprehended several gang members believed to be directly involved in retaliatory attacks, though the main perpetrators of the heist remained elusive. The authorities were relentless, knowing that every arrest could bring them closer to unravelling the mystery of the stolen coke and stopping the escalating violence. As the investigation continues, law enforcement faces a daunting challenge. Not only must they apprehend those responsible for the heist, but they must also prevent the violence from spiralling further out of control. With each passing week, the lines between law enforcement and the criminal underworld blur as the police struggle to keep up with an enemy that seems to adapt and retaliate at every turn. The stakes couldn't be higher. Failure to contain this violence would mean more lives lost, more cities caught in the crossfire, and a message to the underworld that their power is greater than the law itself. The violence erupting in the wake of the heist didn't come from nowhere. For years, the criminal network in the Netherlands and Belgium has been a complex web of alliances, territorial disputes, and personal rivalries, each incident feeding into a cycle of trust and betrayal. At the centre of this network is Ridouan Taghi, one of Europe's most powerful crime lords, whose reputation for ruthlessness is built on years of calculated betrayals and brutal power plays. Taghi's rise to power was anything but accidental. For years he operated as the head of the Morocco Mafia, a Dutch-Moroccan criminal organisation that has built its empire on narcotic trafficking, extortion and organised killings. This group emerged in the early 2000s as a dominant force in the European narcotic trade, cementing its place through strategic alliances with other criminal networks, including Serbian and Albanian groups. Taghi's organisation, known for its vicious enforcement tactics, relied on extreme measures in order to keep order within its ranks and to send a message to rivals: betray the organisation and you'll pay with your life. Yet, as with any large criminal network, betrayals were inevitable. Taghi's network suffered internal strife as some of his most trusted associates turned informants or attempted to break free from his control. One of the most notorious incidents was the elimination of attorney Dirk Wiersum in 2019, who'd been representing a witness testifying against Taghi. The assassination sent shockwaves across the Netherlands, underscoring the lengths to which Taghi's organisation would go to protect its secrets. For Taghi, betrayal wasn't just a personal insult, it was an existential threat to his empire. The Morocco Mafia has since operated with a level of secrecy and ferocity that few other criminal networks could match. In addition to Taghi, Serbian and Albanian gangs have long played a significant role in Europe's narcotics trade. These groups, known for their organisational discipline and brutal enforcement tactics, have maintained a foothold in the Dutch and Belgian criminal landscapes.
Organised criminal groups originating in the Western Balkans, such as the Tito and Dino cartel, have long been active in the Netherlands. There are a couple of reasons for this. The Netherlands is Europe's largest maritime freight country and a global trading hub, with the port of Rotterdam the 10th largest container port in the world. That infrastructure and a liberal approach to drugs make the Netherlands attractive to those criminals.
The Serbs, in particular, have a history of forming alliances with other criminal networks, acting as both enforcers and logistics experts. However, these alliances are based on mutual benefit rather than loyalty, and betrayal within these ranks are not uncommon. In a world where power dynamics shift rapidly, today's allies can easily become tomorrow's enemies. One notorious incidence of this was the conflict between Dutch and Serbian criminal elements in Rotterdam, where a Serbian cartel was believed to have double-crossed a Dutch crime family over a shipment dispute. The retaliation was swift, with assassinations and arson attacks marking an escalation that left both sides reeling. These types of conflict have created a tense environment where trust is rare and betrayal is often expected. In the case of the recent heist, it's likely that Taghi and his allies suspect a similar betrayal. Either someone close to them provided insider information, or an allied group saw an opportunity to profit at Taghi's expense. Taghi's arrest in 2019 may have signalled the end of his reign, but his network has continued to thrive, largely due to its deeply ingrained culture of loyalty enforced through fear. However, the heist has changed this structure, exposing vulnerabilities and creating new rifts within the network. Crazy Hakim, meanwhile, finds himself at the centre of suspicion, his name now tied to the heist by virtue of his connection to the fake police officers involved. In the criminal underworld, where reputation is everything, Hakim's position is precarious. Even if he wasn't directly involved, his perceived association with the Rippers has made him a target, both for Taghi's network and for others seeking to capitalise on his weakened position. The years of rivalry, paranoia and power plays have culminated into a situation where neither Hakim nor Taghi can afford to back down. The history of betrayals and rivalries amongst these groups has laid the groundwork for the current conflict. In the Underworld, alliances are often little more than temporary truces, held together by mutual benefit rather than trust. The Heist, therefore, isn't just a theft, it's a tipping point in the long-standing power struggle, one that has brought Europe's criminal elite to a state of open war. And as the violence spreads, the fragile alliances that once held these networks together are disintegrating, leaving behind them chaotic and increasingly dangerous landscape. As news of the heist and the subsequent violence spread, media outlets across Europe scrambled to cover the story, each new development captured in dramatic headlines and urgent broadcasts. Stories of bombings, kidnappings and attacks on family homes painted a grim picture of escalating violence and chaos. For many, the scope and frequency of these incidents seemed straight out of a crime thriller. But for residents in cities like Rotterdam, The Hague and Antwerp, it was a terrifying new reality. The media's intense focus on these events helped expose the scale of the underworld conflict to the public, and the impact was immediate. The major news outlets in the Netherlands and Belgium provided extensive coverage, with newspapers like Het Parool detailing each violent incident in near real time. Reports highlighted the sheer audacity of the heist, describing how fake police officers managed to intercept a truck and make off with millions in coke. Coverage of the retaliatory violence revealed just how quickly the underworld had turned on itself, with attacks occurring almost daily across multiple cities. The message to the public was clear. These weren't isolated events, but part of a larger, deeply rooted criminal conflict spilling into the streets. Public reaction also emerged, partly influenced by investigative reports and crime podcasts, which delved into the histories of key figures like Ridouan Taghi and Crazy Hakim. These in-depth accounts painted an in-depth picture of criminal empires built on violence, betrayal, and an unyielding thirst for power. The portrayal of figures like Taghi and Hakim as almost untouchable criminals added to the public's unease. Where the media often painted law enforcement as committed to dismantling these networks, the reality of these criminals' continued influence, despite arrests, sentences and high security confinement, left many questioning the effectiveness of existing measures. The Marengo murder trial, which sentenced Taghi to life in prison, had been seen as a milestone, a win for law enforcement. Yet the heist and subsequent violence seems to suggest that Taghi's power extended beyond prison walls, raising questions about the limits of the justice system. Here's what an investigative journalist had to say about the narcotic-related violence in the Netherlands. Do you think the recent developments regarding the coke heist depict gaps in prison regulations and legal systems, or are they inevitable no matter how strong the laws are? For law enforcement, the public reaction served as a reminder of the importance of their work and the high stakes involved. Officers patrolling affected areas reported feeling the weight of public expectation, knowing that communities they served were looking to them for protection. But even as they doubled down on their efforts to apprehend the Rippers and quell the violence, they knew the road ahead was daunting. The criminals they faced were sophisticated, well-resourced, and unafraid to challenge the law in full view of the public. The theft of 1,400 kilos of coke was more than a heist. It was the spark that unleashed one of Europe's most savage underworld wars. What began as a single act of betrayal spiraled into a war spanning borders and dragging both criminals and civilians into a relentless cycle of violence and retribution. For Ridouan Taghi, Crazy Hakim, and the many others who hold power in the criminal underworld, this wasn't merely about narcotics or money. This was about authority, respect, and the need to send a clear message that betrayal comes with a deadly cost. The fallout from the heist has shown just how deeply entrenched and resilient these criminal networks are. Despite life sentences, high security prisons, and extensive law enforcement efforts, figures like Taghi remain influential, capable of orchestrating complex operations, even from behind bars. For law enforcement, this conflict has revealed the urgent need for new strategies, new technologies, and closer international cooperation. The violence spreading across Rotterdam, The Hague, Antwerp and beyond has underscored that combating organised crime requires a coordinated effort not only to dismantle the criminal networks, but to safeguard the communities caught in the crossfire. Communities, meanwhile, have been left to grapple with the aftershocks of a conflict they never asked for. The families in affected neighbourhoods have learnt the hard way that gang violence is no longer confined to shady dealings or hidden hideouts. Bombs exploding in residential areas, kidnappings and brazen attacks on family homes have blurred the lines between the criminal underworld and everyday life, leaving civilians feeling more vulnerable than ever. And as these communities strive to rebuild a sense of security, many wonder whether this conflict will subside or continue to simmer, waiting for the next betrayal, the next spark. For the gangs involved, the stakes have never been higher. The alliances, betrayals and power struggles that have marked the European narcotic trade for years are now under intense public scrutiny, and each new act of violence only heightens that exposure. This conflict has not only weakened these criminal networks internally, but has made them more visible, turning the spotlight on an underworld that once thrived on secrecy. For Taghi, Hakim and their allies, this visibility is dangerous. It makes them more vulnerable, more likely to be targeted not just by rivals, but by increasingly determined law enforcement agencies. The media, too, has played a crucial role in shaping the public's understanding of this conflict, documenting the violence and the fear it has created. The constant stream of headlines, images and investigative reports has kept the story in the public eye, fostering both awareness and urgency. Yet this coverage has also fueled anxiety, reminding people daily of the criminals operating within their cities. For many, this heightened awareness of organised crime has led to new perspective on the narcotic trade, an industry often viewed from a distance but now revealed as a destructive force capable of reaching into their own neighbourhoods. As the dust settles, one thing is certain: this heist and its aftermath have left a permanent mark. Law enforcement will continue their pursuit, determined to bring stability back to the streets and to break the cycle of violence. Communities, once blindsided by the reach of organised crime, are now more vigilant, more united in their efforts to reclaim their safety. And for the underworld figures embroiled in this conflict, the heist serves as a grim reminder of the constant threat of betrayal, a reality that shapes their every decision in a world where loyalty is fleeting and the alliances are as fragile as the next stolen shipment. For now, the fallout from the 1,400 kilos of stolen coke remains a strong indication of the consequences of betrayal in the criminal world. It's a story that has revealed the hidden cracks in Europe's most feared criminal networks, a story of revenge and survival that has left entire cities shaken and put the dark heart of organised crime on full display. And while the violence may subside, the undercurrents of tensions and rivalries remain, waiting for the next conflict, the next betrayal, to once again bring Europe's underworld to the surface.